Well, great. Well, last time we had left off, we had talked a little bit about the history of liberalism. We had gone through quite a bit of, I guess, general building blocks and kind of eras over the last, I guess, millennia, if you will, and kind of some things that have built up to the idea of what we consider liberalism and kind of modern thinking, modernism too. And we had said that we're going to kind of start, or we're going to kind of maybe not shift gears, but add some more context to specifically the United States and how the foundation of our country has influenced or was influenced or is continuing to influence the the structure of how we think and why it's important, and maybe some of the ways that modern philosophies or epistemologies or are combating, opposing, maybe even trying to demolish the main, well, I guess a lot of the foundational principles. And so, we had said we're gonna kind of start with the Federalist Papers and some of those founding documents. Before we kind of dive into maybe the significance of the Federalist Papers, Christian, could you give us a little bit of background maybe on what they are and I guess for the time frame why it was important to the founding fathers, and then we can kind of maybe get into why they're important for us to continue to recognize today. But what are the Federalist Papers to start?
It's a series of essays that were written by Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and this guy that's often forgotten. His name's John Jay. He only wrote, I think it was five of them, and he ended up getting sick. And so he ended up kind of withdrawing. So the history at the time is really important. I mean, this is like 18, or sorry, not 1800s, like 1770s, 1778-ish, kind of in there.
18th
So
century.
yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's what I was looking for.
Mm.
So it's important at the time. So the Articles of Confederation are in place. It's weak. There's no centralized government. The states don't really know how to interact with one another on a policy, economic, governmental level because no one's in charge. And I think that's a really oversimplified way of kind of saying that, but they don't have the federal government like we know today. Washington, D.C. is not, the place where all the senators and like as we understand it. So it's um, it's important to keep that in mind. So the Constitution has not even been adopted yet. And you have anti-federalists, the ones that are really worried about having a strong federal government for a number of reasons. They're worried about, the lack of protection, the lack of individual rights, probably, I mean, realistically stemming over from, their time in England, the tyrannical reign of England. And you have the Federalists, these three, that are trying to say, we have a problem with the Articles of Confederation. We need a constitution to bring some strength, some unity, some framework into the government so that we can actually operate as one nation because they weren't operating that way. And so that's the big fight that's going on. But you're in New York, which is a really big anti-federalist state. And so you have James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and John Jay that are writing under an alias, submitting these essays, trying to print them out as fast as they can write them, like three or four a week, essentially making the argument for why we need a constitution. And they go about it a little bit differently. They didn't all see eye to eye. John Jay, I mean, he's kind of left out, but Hamilton and Madison they do not agree like completely on how this ought to look down the line. But in the moment they did, they knew that we needed some kind of strength and some kind of centralized federal government.
And this is kind of what led to, if I'm not mistaken, kind of the is it the Constitutional Convention, something like that, right? Which then later was what, I mean, every state sent representatives and whatnot, and they ended up kind of they kind of set the framework for the Constitution and whatnot. But this is what, we're talking after the Revolution, correct? We're talking
Yeah.
they've already fought England, they've kicked them out. Right now, it's we're trying to establish a country of our own, but there's not a solid framework for how to do that outside of a couple of weak articles that kind of bind everybody together, but also make it very everyone's so independent. It's almost like they're acting as 13 separate countries in some sense. Is that correct?
Yeah, yes, and I think the reaction is completely understandable, at least from my perspective, because you have, I mean, you have the tyrannical reign of England, and you just fought a war with them. So the
Right.
last thing you want to do is have a bunch of people come together and say, "We're going to put this one in charge." Like, isn't it, to your ordinary person, at least, if I'm trying to speculate what it would be like, I'd be like, "No way, no, that's what I just fought against." And you have these two guys. You're right. The Constitutional Convention was like May 1787 or something. Um, um, and you have these guys that are like, well, we hear the reaction and it's understandable, but we're trying to say something a little bit different here. So just give us a chance to kind of explain it. And I think that these papers really were that. They're saying, no, there's a necessity to be able to do that. Government is necessary, but you can institute all sorts of limitations and balancing. And I mean, however you want to describe that, there's all sorts of framework and um, I think balancing is a good word to make sure that you don't end up with what they just experienced, forever in England.
Right. Right. And I think, I mean, of course, it's important to note that, neither you nor I are historians, and nor do we
No,
have
yeah, not by any
everything
means.
right, nor do we have all of the information, and we haven't studied. I mean, geez, we spent a week, a couple of days, kind of.
Yeah,
You've done more extensive study, but in terms of preparation for us talking
sure.
about this now, it's a few days of kind of going back and forth and whatnot. And there's going to be some holes absolutely in what we say, but I think generally we're just trying to get to a good or get our footing, if you will, on why these things are significant in some sense. And so I guess, and this is going to be the bulk of what it is. What's the what's the significance of these? If these things were written, 250 years ago, which is about, I mean, roughly about when they were written,
Yeah.
why would we view this as important just in general terms as we kind of get kind of start to dive into the specifics, but why do we care?
Yep. And I think I was waiting for you to pose it like that. Why do we care? I mean, everybody took American history, right, in high school. So you're probably familiar. I mean, George Washington, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and James Monroe. Like everybody knows these people. But what is the significance of these documents that were just published? Well, I think there's two important things that come to mind for me. First, it's tying it back to what we were talking about last week, and that is currently when you have the battle of these narratives going on, it's essentially arguing that we ought to be interpreting reality one way over another. And that's important. And part of the argument that I'm making, and that a lot of the anti-postmodernist literature is making, is that that's not what was intended when this experiment was started. And if you're going to make a claim like that, you need to have evidence. Postmodernists would say you don't, but you do. You need to be able to prove it in order, I think, for it to have, any kind of academic or intellectual credibility. Or else I'm just any other guy that's out here like, oh, you should believe what I say, and because I think that's what we ought to do. Like that doesn't fly with me. Generally doesn't fly at all. Um, so I think that kind of gets at your point. The second thing why I think if I'm going to make a separate plug for this, I'm going to say the history is important. These were people that were close to the time of the Enlightenment that were saying, we just experienced something we don't want to experience anymore. We fought a war over it and a lot of people died. We're going to try this new experiment. We're going to organize this society, this government in a particular way that's going to value certain things. Let's try it. That was 250 years ago. None of us were even remotely close to being around back then.
Right.
Everything we read is in books, in letters, in essays, in secondhand experiences, etc., and from experts that are recalling that. I think that a really strong way to understand what they were thinking is to just read what they wrote. And this is what it is. This is what these guys produced. Um, I'm a little biased too. I mean, I'm part of what is called the Federalist Society in the law school, and so James Madison is like the picture for the group logo.
Sure.
Like this is stuff that's somewhat familiar for me. So, but the other thing I'll make a plug for too is these weren't the only guys that were writing. I mean, you had Washington writing, Jefferson writing, John Adams, George Mason, James Wilson. I mean, there's just a variety of literature, and people should definitely go read that and come to their own conclusion. And ultimately, that's my challenge: is you don't have to take my word for it. Go read it. There's a number of tools that can help you do it. One, just try to read it. I think, I mean, it's hard. It'll take you some time. You'll have to reread and reread, but look at what they're saying and how they're saying it. And if you can't understand it, fine, go find a secondary source. Go find a law review article. You can find a book. You can find a historical account. You can use Chat GPT and just ask it to explain that to you. So there were a few things there. I got a little bit away from why do we care, but that's at least why I care. There's a few reasons baked into that.
Yeah, I guess why would it be important, I guess, or I guess what's your argument in some sense of we're talking about this what we're really trying to get at is why are people challenging what's going on and how do we maybe push back or maintain some of the traditional thinking and whatnot that's been trailblazed for us and whatnot. Why is that really significant? And you had touched on this about why history is important and such, but I guess in terms of our country, these are maybe the foundational documents, but why would we want our country to stay the same if maybe people are saying there could be a better way? Why wouldn't we, or what would cause that to have some credibility or even be worth considering if what you're saying is we need to look at these things, what would have to be, I guess, in place? Or I don't know if you get what I'm trying to get at here.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. I'm gonna take it a step. I'm gonna take it a prior step though. I
Sure.
think in order for you to, not you, but whomever,
Sure.
in order for one to argue or to posit that they know that, or they think, or that we ought to be moving past whatever it is that we live in, you have to understand what you're living in and what has been there. And I don't think, at least in a lot of the literature that I've read, I think it doesn't accurately um, engage or fairly engage with the fact that these authors, I'm not going to spoil the fun yet, but it doesn't accurately or honestly engage with the material that they're actually citing in their papers. It's some of the postmodern thought is suggesting the Enlightenment's not worth having, or that we've moved past it. We are postmodern thought. Well, we better understand what modern thought is and how it actually affects our lives before we can come to a conclusion that we no longer need it or it's bad or we never needed it, etc., whatever. You have to do that beforehand. So what I'm suggesting is, and I'm claiming that our country is founded on a lot of those Enlightenment, scientific revolution, Judo-Christian, or um, I'm not saying it right.
I know what you're trying to say, though. You even put it,
Judeo-Christian. I was
yes,
just messing up the
Judeo-Christian.
Judeo-Christian kind of values. Well, if you disagree with that, let's read the papers and see what these people actually thought, rather than just assuming that we know or getting too far ahead of ourselves that we just don't need it anymore. Well, let's talk about it. So that's the challenge that I'm hurling is let's actually dig into this and see what's going on. Now, to the question of well, what if we see? I just don't think we can get to the question of what if we are ready to move past that because we
Sure.
haven't even laid the foundation of
Yeah.
where we are.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit of a historical kind of review. But I think baked into that is once you start unpacking those things, you're going to see that they really did value the concepts that were discussed through the Enlightenment era. So it's going to be a little bit circular. So you have to understand the Enlightenment era, and then you have to understand why these guys, what they thought and what they valued. And in order to do that, you have to understand the Enlightenment era. So it's going to feel circular. The last thing I'll add to this is, and I'm talking fast, if you are going to say that we no longer need the stuff, the ideas, the concepts that were advocated for by the founding fathers, you are essentially saying, I think, in my perspective, one, you either know better than them and that we shouldn't have done this in the first place, or we don't need it anymore because we are continuing to evolve.
Hmm.
That's again a really big claim, and
Hmm.
I don't think that there's much evidence, let alone credible evidence, to be able to support a claim of that magnitude. So there's a lot of objections I have to the postmodern thought, and the reason why I'm trying to back us up is so we actually have a foundation of what I perceive and claim to be the narrative that we're living in.
Yeah. Yeah. And truthfully, I think to your point and credit is most most arguments I've seen now, again, I'm not necessarily well versed in what postmodern philosophers, academics, or activists are saying,
Well,
but
you've read the book.
yes, right, but not. I mean, I'm not having high level discussions on a regular basis. That's what I'm trying to say, right? In the sense of most claims I've seen don't call back to the foundational principles, right? They're just saying in a sense of to your point, they're just saying we just got to create a whole new narrative and everything that is we're just kind of moving on and creating something new from because it doesn't kind of fit our bill. If I'm understanding what a lot of postmodernists are trying to do, where I think to your point, it's well, let's understand why we have what we have in the first place. And if there is something better, then let's just make sure we get this right. We're understanding it and then making claims based on the evidence and not just trying to undermine
Yeah,
everything, all of the framework that's been laid for us up to this point.
yes, you fit your theories based on the facts. You don't pick and choose your facts to fit your theories. That's not good reasoning. In fact, I think it's dishonest. Um, yeah, and then you made another point that I did I yeah, I thought it was good. I can't remember it now. Um, yeah, they're in a broad sweep. They are saying we don't need it, so we're not talking about it anymore. They're trying to replace, they're trying to institute an entirely new program in rather than trying to identify and particularize maybe some of the bugs in the code. They just want to write a new code.
Right,
They meaning the postmodernists.
right.
They're trying to, I mean, replace wholesale the narrative that I believe accurately reflects the reality that we live in. And in fact, I think it's a good thing.
Sure.
And so, yeah, I'm exceptionally skeptical, and you're probably sensing I'm argumentative about it because I think it's just inherently bad. And in order for us to, if we're to lend any credibility to what this alternative, this radical alternative is, we need to truly understand what has been for the last 250 years, the reality we've been living in. So
Yeah.
that's the end of my argument.
Yeah. No, and I think this has been a good intro. I mean, we're about halfway through our time, and I want to kind of dive in maybe a little bit more into the things we actually looked at this week and some of the claims that we're trying to make beyond the generalities. Um, But yeah, I guess that's kind of the next step then, or unless you have something else you want to say is, I guess what are the things that were being said? What do the papers actually say? And how does that start to frame or what were the things they were trying to frame for the foundation of our country? What are kind of some of your initial thoughts?
I mean, ultimately, I think what it boils down to is they're Madison and Hamilton and Jay as well. Jay did a lot of was more foreign policy related, and the other two are more government structure, governmental organization, and they get much more particularized. They or granular. They talk about how the executive ought to be organized. The executive meaning under Article 2 of the Constitution, the president, the
Right.
executive branch. talk about what should the legislature look like? How should we organize the judiciary? What should foreign policy and taxation look like? A lot of with if I'm going to speak, in an I'm being overbroad, but the issues that people were concerned about because of where they came from in England, those issues are on people's mind. And so they're talking about, hey, here are the ways that we address these things in a constitution that allows us to be unified and strong while also recognizing individual liberties. And that ends up being a core, I think, struggle between, maybe struggle is the wrong word, but if we were to differentiate between Madison and Hamilton, Hamilton wanted a little more flexibility, really robust, strong central government. And I think that Madison also wanted strong unity, or to have unity, but less flexibility and letting individual rights be kind of the ground floor. So there's always a certain level of protection so that that whatever majority's in charge can't come in and pound out the minority and essentially, turn it into mob tyranny. So I think that I'm still painting in broad strokes because it's hard. You have to when you're talking about
Yeah.
85. I think there's 85 different essays of varying length. So it's hard to be like, well, let's cover everything. But there's a number of things they're talking about.
Well, and to your credit, I think also, if we were to, if we can absolutely take time for this, I think, as we move forward in a sense, but to go through the specifics of how and why they designed the legislature, the way that they designed it, that's quite a discussion in and of itself, because that's a lot of
Yep.
history and philosophy, but also, I mean, they had, I wouldn't want to say hundreds, but probably close to 100 hours of argument just about that. I mean, because that was one of the main points of what people disputed was how people are represented and whether or not, and how power is distributed amongst groups versus individuals. And
Yeah.
that's also, I mean, that's a I guess the key point, or one of the main principles of postmodernism, is the principle of, is it power or knowledge or something like that, right? I don't know if that's both of them, but
Our knowledge.
power,
Yeah.
knowledge. Yep, there you go. And I think that talks specifically to that point as to why they did this. But no, I think to your point, we kind of have to brushstroke it a little bit. Um, I guess continuing the general discussion, what are maybe some things, and this might even just be a two-parter. We could absolutely kind of make this another. We can continue the discussion the next time. But what are some of the main themes or principles and value-based kind of ideas that are readily apparent and common amongst their writings? What are some of the things that come up often that seem to be um, woven into what clearly they value, that then creates, I guess, the more government structure that they try to apply it to? Do you get what I'm asking?
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting you asked it that way because I was thinking about it. I think we'd end up at the same conclusion, but you asked it a little bit differently. So I'll do my best to
Sure. Yeah.
maybe
No.
kind of weave them together. What's interesting to me about this stuff is you can extrapolate um, really what I'm in. Let me back up. Really, what I'm interested in doing this, it's what feels like an academic exercise is going through and finding the philosophical undertones and the Enlightenment kind of influence that these guys are experiencing or had experienced, and being able to show how this is coming out, how it's blooming in what they're writing. They're not going to come out and verbatim say, look, we need to have a country, we're after creating this sense of liberalism. If we need these Judeo-Christian values, we have to rely on science. Like, we're not doing that. That's not what it looks like.
Right.
You'll see them talk heavily about being a rational reasoned being and how that we have natural rights and that humans naturally have dignity that's bestowed upon them by the creator, by the divine creator. you can sense these undertones or these themes that are coming out. So just trace it back to where it came from. You can see that, less than 100 years ago, I mean, really in this era, the Enlightenment is really has taken hold. We have people that are acting rationally. How do we act rationally? We use our reasoning. Okay, well, why is that important? Okay, where do we get that from? Why does any of that matter? We have these ideas of natural rights. Well, who gave them to us? Why is that important? Do we have just natural worth because we're human beings? You can, it's interesting. And then you start to, walk back or peel through, um, influential writing. I mean, like Locke, Hobbes, Rousseau, Machiavelli, Hume, Smith. I mean, the list goes on and on. You
Right.
can see these undertones. That's what I keep calling it. I don't know if that's the right word, but you have these themes that keep coming out. And so to me, it's obvious because I know where it came from, but it may be not obvious if you are reading this for the first time. And if you're under the impression that this strictly is just, no, these are papers arguing about how the Constitution and the government should be organized. Well, where did that come from?
Right.
I think government is a step below. We have the narrative at the top, and then you have other things that are stacked below it, and the government is certainly a thing below it. You have to get the narrative right in order to get the government right. So I think that's really what I'm trying to heal out of this
Yeah.
a lot.
No, and I think that's great. And maybe even we just kind of, as I kind of said earlier, we kind of make this a part two for next week or when we do it, of we kind of go into those things more and maybe, as you say, extrapolate where specifically we're finding those undertones and right, maybe even quoting their words and saying, "Yep, they're this paper," because you had encouraged me, to read a handful of them. You said that some of the most important ones are like paper 1, 10, 14, 37, 39, right? And the list is much more than that, but we could maybe even just go through and pinpoint some of those key points because all of them talk about different things, right? The paper 1 just talks about it's the introduction to what they're going to be discussing in terms of how
Yep.
they think government should work and where kind of the direction, that classic start with the end in mind. I think you had mentioned that in one of our previous um, kind of conversations as well. But I think there would be some value in saying, "Yep, in paper 39, they're talking about this specifically, and we can see that because of um, what they're talking about related to government, that this is motivated by these values and these core principles and whatnot." I don't know if that's kind of what maybe that's
Yeah.
a good direction for us to go, or if you have something different, or if you want to even add anything kind of in closing, I guess, to some degree as well.
Yeah, I've forgotten that I had planned out a little bit of an explanation for the reason we can arrive at those conclusions. We're drawing inferences, and so they're not going to come out. My joke, as I was kind of
Right.
playing around, was they're not going to come out and tell you exactly this is the prescription that's going to get us through the experiment. Like that's not what they're going to say. We can snuff out these themes and essentially make inferences that allow us to come to the conclusion. And I think I defined it, but an inference is a conclusion reached on the basis of evidence and reasoning. We don't have any direct evidence of them saying this is exactly what it's going to be. We have to come to that conclusion on our own. And that's why I'm saying it's a little bit, the process is circular because you have to be familiar with the Enlightenment era in order to recognize these themes. And then once you recognize these themes, you go back to the Enlightenment era and go, oh, okay, yeah, I can see how these guys were affected and how they were influenced. So it's going to be cyclical like that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's what I was going to say. I was also going to be like, I'll just put the entire list out here. The list that I've come up with is papers 1, 10, 14, 37, 39, 43, 49, 50, 51, 55, 70, 78, 83, and 85. Maybe you already picked up on this, but these are mostly written by Madison. Madison certainly is where I tend to gravitate more towards. Um, but Hamilton, I mean, there's value in reading the Hamilton stuff. I don't remember what the difference is. Did Hamilton write like 51 and I'm trying to do the math. I don't know. Hamilton wrote 50 something. I think Madison wrote 29 or 30. Jay did like five, I think,
Sure.
something like that. I don't know if my math adds up,
Yeah, that adds
but
up.
it's important to they both play a different role, and it's interesting to see the kind of push and pull between the two, even though they're ultimately advocating for the same result, for a strong, unified federal government, centralized federal government to be able to really unify the country, unify the state. So it is a historical review. It's a little bit academic, but I think it's important.
Yeah. Well, I look forward to diving into a little bit more this week and maybe coming back with some more specifics to related to kind of some of the ideas you've presented here and kind of starting to whittle down maybe the generalities into more bite-size applicable things that, as you say, can be inferred and then recognized and understood as important for our current modern day, how we see things, how we think, and then maybe even how
Yeah.
we combat some of the struggle and strife maybe that's going on in our culture politically and socially. But with that, unless you have anything else to add, let's put a
I can
pin
say
in
one
it.
thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
One thing. So before, I mean, next week, if hopefully my kids watch this one day, I think my advice is go read them. And I
Yeah,
know I've said that a few times. Just try it. Get accustomed to the language, see what's actually coming out of their mouths, because that's the direct source. And so I think that starting there is probably the first thing. So I mean, I just put the list out there. If anybody ever ends up listening to this, go read them before you watch the next episode so you can come to your own conclusions. And at some point, if we have a chance to chat about it, then great. We can discuss, we can agree, we can disagree, we can work it out. So that's my, I don't know, that's my challenge.
yeah, I think that's great. Well, great. We'll pick it back up next week.
Okay.